dying.
Hey sis, welcome to the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Wagner, and while I'm tough as a mother, sometimes I know we're all out here, tired of needing to be one. Buckle up as we land the mothership and all things motherhood in the real world. Before we move on, I'd like to thank the incredible sponsors who saw an opportunity to support women in their day-to-day journeys by joining together to make this podcast a reality. Thank you, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Pancyzyszyn with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and CHIKA Creative for believing in better care, better support, and better outcomes for mamas and their families in the real world. The information provided in the podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical, health, or nutritional advice. Welcome to episode 2, part 1, with my ridiculously amazing new friend, Lindsy Moffatt. She's a holistic nutritionist who is a certified GAPS coach, a wife, a mama to 2 wonderful kids, and founder of Spectrum Able. It's based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and she loves spending her time helping other parents of children and adults with autism and ADHD. She helps them through nutrition, detox, and of course, centering mindset. Prepare yourself because whether autism is part of your life or not, this has a ripple effect on all of us. So without further ado, please welcome my friend, Lindsy Moffatt, to the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. Hey, Lindsy.
Hey, Alicia, thank you so much for having me on today.
You are so welcome. I feel like we have to get the listeners up to speed on how you and I even got connected to begin with. So let's go back a few weeks. We're in Orlando, Florida. I'm standing in my hotel room in the morning, getting ready to come down for what is our last day. My podcast producer sends me, which is the intro to the podcast, which everybody heard it as we got on. It is the Barbie quote from the movie where she says, "Do you guys ever feel like you want to die?" And that was really important to me to include because so many women out here are feeling this way. And it's a lot because of families who are experiencing chronic illness and toxic load. And this has come out of nowhere in the past 10 years. And families, especially mamas, they're just lost, right? So cue me going down the elevator, coming into the room for, again, what is the last day. And Beth Lambert with Epidemic Answers on the screen presents your story. And it is literally one of the first times I've heard another mama out loud with a group of people get so vulnerable around their story, right? So I work with parents and I work with mamas behind the scenes and doing coaching, but I've never, ever heard anyone look into the camera like you did, tell their story, and out loud with a group of people admit that you felt like you wanted to die going through the journey that you have with your family and your son having severe autism. And so it was like a record screeching halt moment that I'm like, hold on a minute. I have to move who I originally had as my second guest on this podcast because I think this conversation is so important. And so just so our listeners know, that's how we got together. And so I want you to just take it from there and just tell us a little bit about what that clip was, your story, and how you got on this podcast and as part of your story, what you want to go through with families today.
Yes, thank you for giving me a platform to share my story again. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about what that clip was about. I did an interview last month. It was a 30-minute interview with the Epidemic Answers. And I was sharing about my journey with my son's severe nonverbal autism. And they chopped the interview up into 6 minutes. And so that was what you saw. And in there, I talked about, about 8 years ago now, I actually was wanting to die. And I would been very open about that. I'm like an open book. So I'm very transparent about that. But life was so difficult. And I think in the video, I was crying also because when I relive those days, it's really, really difficult to think about how terrible life was. It was like, I say sometimes that it was worse than death. It was like a living death, like an ongoing nightmare that wouldn't end. And so luckily I found solutions to my son's problems, that he's no longer nonverbal. He's no longer severely autistic. He's doing absolutely incredible, amazing. All my dreams have come true for him now, fast forward to today. But yeah, I do still work with a lot of people whose children are like my son used to be, and I help them get their children to where my son is now. And it's very rewarding, but it's terrible to see and to be aware of all the suffering that is going on right now. And like you said, it's just exponentially increased in the past few decades. So
yeah,
it's
it's very alarming. And so what was so unique about you sharing your story, and thank you so much for taking some time right now to just walk through that, right? And I can see as you sit here and just as we go back, like how traumatic that is. And that's why this podcast is called the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. And it is exponentially increasing. And so many families are out here feeling so alone and by themselves. And it's why I wanted to have you on. So good news on the front end of the podcast, there is hope. There are solutions. Healing is possible for our children. But I also don't want to jump past, again, you said this felt like a living death. Would you be able to rewind us a little bit into some of those days as to what were some of the things that you were experiencing? Because I find that so many moms out here, they feel like they're in this alone, or that their children are experiencing some behavioral issues, or they're experiencing some health symptoms that parents think, man, they're just out here on an island, and they're not.
Yeah, there's so many of us living the same, very similar journey all over the world, really. So rewind to when my son was 3 years old. This is when it really started. He would start having meltdowns out of nowhere. You wouldn't understand why it happened. He couldn't communicate, so you didn't know if it was a smell or something he saw. Like, it would just be out of nowhere. He'd be happy one minute, and then a minute later hitting himself, screaming. I remember holding his face in front of me one day and saying, look at me in my eyes. And his eyes would just dart around. Like, it was physically impossible for him to make eye contact with me. So as a mother, it was terrible. It was horrible. My son couldn't communicate. I couldn't figure out what was bothering him. I couldn't help him. And these meltdowns would last for sometimes over an hour or more. He was a runner, so he would elope, which means he would just run the other way and not look back. So you can imagine the worries and the fears that you would have as a mother of a child that does these things, that couldn't talk if he got lost, who couldn't communicate to somebody. It's difficult. We'd have to lock the windows, or he'd climb out on the second story. If I took him to the beach, he would run into the ocean and drown himself if I let him. I'd have to pull him out of the water. He just had very little awareness for really what was going on.
Yeah.
He would self-injure, injure others, and scream hundreds of times a day. And I was looking for solutions for 2 years. And fast forward to when he was 5, he was still in diapers, still nonverbal, still would scream hundreds of times a day, could barely sleep at night, was afraid of loud noises, different textures, didn't want to wear clothes. I mean, it made life very difficult, like a living hell, 24/7.
Yeah, I have found with different families that we have been exposed to through our own journey, there is this line between what's going on, and then there's this line of your life outside of your home. And so it is very difficult, because I think with these new childhood epidemics, this is happening so incredibly fast that our generation just hasn't had time to catch up with this. And so, something I heard a lot, and maybe you did too, is, hey, we understand that something's going on, but how can we help you? And at the time, I literally did not have an answer to that question, because I'm going through my own emotions. I'm trying to help my daughter, and we didn't fully know what was going on. And it sounds like you were in that same camp. And I think a lot of parents are. I've often used that analogy as well, that it in the beginning stages years ago, it felt like a living death. And that's not to dismiss anybody who has actually went through that type of scenario in their life where they have lost someone. But it's the only thing I also know how to compare it to. And when I heard you say it in your video, I was like, oh my gosh, somebody else who understands what this felt like. And hopefully for other parents that are listening as well, that there is no instructions that have come with this. And especially, right, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And I would say in the last 5 years, we're really starting to gain some ground here. But I just really want to meet so many parents where they're at right now, which was the point of this podcast, that look, we get it. And no, there's not a lot of solutions out there, but we're starting to build them, and we want to make them more accessible. We want to provide solutions, answers, and hope for parents that are listening, but yeah, aren't alone, that's for sure. Not anymore.
Absolutely. There's not very much help out there. And you're right, there is some help, but I didn't find it from the people who you'd expect to find it from. When my son was 3 and having these problems, it was going to take us 9 months to be seen for a diagnosis. We lived in San Diego. The system is so backed up. And then even when you do start to get seen by these people, the specialists, they're not giving you good answers. They're not giving you good information. It's unfortunate, but I actually call doctors, hope killers a lot of the times, because I hear what they're telling my clients, and it's so disheartening. They're really telling them to basically give up on their hopes for their children, that there's nothing they can do except pharmaceutical drugs and, therapy or institutional care. Mm-hmm. And they're actively discouraging the real solutions, such as nutritional protocols, gut healing diets, things like that actually are making a real difference in these kids' lives. So it's really, really terrible what's going on. And it's really why I do what I do.
So I was reading through your website, and would you be able to just give our listeners, it was a blog I think you wrote where it's like, run the other way if you hear these things. And so for listeners, I know for me, and maybe you found yourself in this too, we waited too long, right, with some of the soft signs or maybe some of the things that were happening out of the gate. And it's very scary for parents, right? Your ego gets in the way. Maybe it's just my parenting, maybe this is something outside of what is health. So I think there's that camp, right? And then there's those of us that you do pull the trigger and you start to go for answers, and then you're stuck for months or years in this camp where you're actually not lined up with the right providers. And so when I read through your website, what I loved is you gave some here. If first of all, early intervention is key. If we can help children earlier in their development with different conditions that are going on, it's just like working muscles, right? The earlier we can get this, the more we can get interventions earlier, we can get kids healed faster and better. So if you're on the fence, this is a sign, and this is a podcast that if you need help, they can certainly lean into you. They can lean into Beth Lambert and Documenting Hope and Epidemic Answers. They can lean in with me at the Joss District, but do not do this alone. Early intervention is key, and we can help you understand what some of those things are. But I want you to go through that blog that you did. And if you're hearing some of these things, it means run the other way. And then where do you need to go?
Yeah, definitely. It's really to run the other way if your team, your doctor, or anybody else on your team, a therapist, doesn't believe in your child. I would say run the other way, because a big part of what I teach is that our beliefs are so powerful. They have a really big effect on the results that we're going to experience. And so it's really important that everybody on your child's team really believes in them and their ability to make progress.
Yeah. So are you saying if they just want to throw a pharmaceutical, then run the other way? If it's just wanting to do different therapies, run the other way? So what are some of those specifics? Or, hey, your child, this is just their life and this is how it's going to be. So Do you have some things that you've heard along the way that if parents are hearing it, that they know they should lean in harder over here?
Yeah, I've heard that a doctor told one of my clients, the quicker that you give up hope, the better. Things like that. So yeah, just that there's, nothing to really help them except, like I said, and just really not believing in their ability to make drastic progress. And so if you do some searching and find, a GAPS practitioner or a naturopath, maybe a different, like what we used to call them was DAN doctors, which stands for Defeat Autism Now. And doctors that, really believe in your child's ability to make what we would call a recovery.
Yeah. Beth went through that in this last podcast episode where, listen, the number one thing you can do, the life hack that's going to make the biggest difference is putting on the mindset that healing is possible for your child. And so, I want to give parents that Rocky smack right now and maybe you were here too, Lindsay. I know I was, that on the beginning of this, like if you're going through this for a year or two and you're not getting anywhere, it is so easy to slip into this mindset where you're overwhelmed. It's touching every trauma trigger that you have, right? You're watching your child struggle in front of your eyes. You're watching them say and do things that are just, they're horrific as a parent to watch. And so much grace, so much mercy for families and parents and caregivers that are listening, because it is easy to slide into this mindset of despair. And so it's natural, but what we need are communities like this to be like, here's the Rocky smack, right? Like, hey, listen, healing is possible. There are solutions. There are answers out there. And here are the things that we can do. So first and foremost, I just want to put that out there for parents, because this is hard. It is so abrupt. It is like nothing we have seen. This is not the friends or the type of families that we were growing up with. Like this, to your point, the exponential increases in these childhood epidemics, it is abrupt and it is difficult and it's impacting so many different things, but it is certainly interrupting and disrupting the mental health of parents and caregivers at the core of what's going on out here. And that was the ripple effect that we talked about at the beginning of the introduction of the podcast, that it's like, look, this isn't just impacting the caregivers, it's impacting the families, it's impacting the workplace, it's impacting our healthcare system, it's impacting our educational system. And so this isn't something that's just a one-off for parents. It is something that all of us have a part in. So what are the foundations of success? When a family shows up with you, what are some of the things that you've been able to do in order to heal and reverse your son's autism?
Yeah, I'm happy to share those. And I just love doing this work because I see the most fantastic results with the families I work with, and it's so quick. And so the four foundational aspects to having the most amount of success on this journey, in my opinion, are going to be, number one is the nutritional protocol that I teach. And that is based on the GAPS diet, which stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. And it was created by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, who healed her son and then went on to heal thousands of her patients. And it's since become a worldwide phenomenon. It's a 6-stage elimination diet, essentially. It's a gut healing diet. I don't even like the word diet. I like referring to it as a nutritional protocol. It's just a nicer term. But essentially you go to stage 1, and that's where we see the most amount of miracles in the shortest amount of time. I'm talking, we often see children who are nonverbal and non-responsive start saying sentences within 2 weeks, become fully potty trained, all kinds of incredible things. And as you spoke to earlier, the younger, the faster the healing, but it's also never too late. I've worked with adults and teens who also have life-changing progress. And I interviewed a man who healed in his 40s with this diet as well. So it's never, ever too late, but definitely the younger you can start, the better. After the food, which is just so powerful on its own, then we have the environment, the home environment. So one thing I learned early on in this journey, after I started the GAPS diet when my son was 5, and he was having so much progress. He started getting these rashes from his diaper line down to his ankle. And I did some research and I learned that they had a byproduct of bleach, and then that's linked to toxic shock syndrome that they also add to the tampons. So I started buying the organic, non-toxic diapers, and the rashes went away. And then I realized, gosh, if there's poison being strapped to my child's genitals, like what else is there poison in? And I started researching the ingredients and the things that aren't labeled, right, on everything. And I learned that the laundry detergent was toxic, everything in my home, pretty much, even the electromagnetic frequencies, right? And so I began a journey of detoxing my home environment and switching out everything from the synthetic chemical version to the natural, non-toxic version, like making my own laundry detergents and all that kind of stuff. Now we're lucky there's lots more good things available. But 10 years ago, it wasn't even as good as it is now. It's a lot harder to find holistic products on the shelf. And so detoxing the home is big because these children are so sensitive and they are already overburdened with toxins. So a lot of people will just start detoxing, but then they're retoxing through their sunscreen, through their toothpaste, through, everything else in their home, right? What they're breathing in, lathering on their skin, putting on, shampoo, all the things, deodorant. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So we really need to remove the intake because they're sensitive, and we need to create more of a healing environment for them. Remove all those chemicals and heavy metals from their home. Even one of the first things my doctor who helped us on this journey told me to do was to replace our mattress, because since 2012, they made it law that they all have to be sprayed with flame retardants, which cause cancer and they're linked to reproductive harm. So you don't want to be breathing these things in 8 hours a night. So there's workarounds. So that's the other big part. And then third is going to be mindset, because as I mentioned a little bit, our beliefs have a powerful effect on our reality, and it just goes further into the words that we use and, the feelings that we have. I tell everybody, you can be giving your child the GAPS diet, you can have a non-toxic home, but if you're screaming at them every day, you're referring to them as nonverbal, you're angry at the world, those things are going to affect your child more than anything else that you do. So those are the top 3 foundational aspects, I think, for success. And then there's so many things we can do beyond that as well. Supplements is a big thing I get into because there's so many synthetic supplements out there that are harmful. So I teach people how to use whole food-based supplements, such as fermented cod liver oil and, the natural, more healthy versions of things. Those would be the top 4.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Can we break out why diet is so incredibly important for our toxic load kiddos? And again, 50% of kids in America have a chronic illness. 1 in 31 kiddos are now being diagnosed with autism. And so we know that, I believe it was Beth threw out the statistic that 77% of college-aged children are being pegged with a psychiatric diagnosis or symptoms. And so, the future, it's easy to sit here and hear these things and it's not feeling bright. And so we need, as the adults in the room, to take responsibility to say, wait, we can't end up at suddenly. There are things that are gradually happening that are contributing to these outcomes. And we have a place in it as the adults in the room to say, time out. Right? These are the things that are contributing. And so diet, mindset, obviously products and toxic load and reducing those stressors is going to be important, but diet is so important. So why, these kids are being born pre-polluted, which is problem number 1. They are coming into the world with an upwards of 200 toxins already in their body. So that is part of why these stressors keep adding up. But diet is something like food is medicine. We're putting food in our body every day. But can you explain then, because we are putting it in our body every day, why food is so important for our kiddos who have toxic load?
It is so important. It's definitely up there with the top things. And, it's really because of what's been done to our food supply in the last 50 years, really, and even more so in the last 30 years. And it seems to be getting worse in a lot of ways also. And it's the things that are pushed in our faces that are so convenient. I mean, I really have to go out of my way to find healthy foods for my son. And a lot of people don't know how to. Honestly, it's terrible, but that's one of the biggest things I teach. And there's literally a healthy version and an unhealthy version of absolutely everything. So even with pickles are fermented foods like sauerkraut, which is a big part of the GAPS healing protocol, is to get these naturally probiotic foods that are more abundant in beneficial bacteria than any probiotic bottle you could buy at the supplement store. But most of them are pasteurized. So I have to teach people how to find the raw ones that are not pasteurized, because if you go to most regular stores, you can't even find them. I actually went, when I was in Florida for the Documenting Hope conference, I went to a Whole Foods and they literally didn't have a GAPS approved pickles. So I couldn't find them. I would have had to go somewhere else. And so that's a big part of what I do is I teach people how to find the farms and find the health food stores in their areas, because they are everywhere, but you have to really know what you're looking for. And a lot of people don't know. They don't know what they're looking for. And the problem is that when they pasteurize 90% of these foods, from the dairy to the juices to the fermented foods, they're heating it up so high, 165 degrees, that it kills all the beneficial bacteria and all the enzymes that our bodies actually need to digest the foods. And then it just becomes this dead food without any, healing properties. And so then also there's the dairy. So we teach that in my course. If you are going to use dairy, which not everybody can tolerate it, but Dr. Natasha recommends if you are going to use it, you need to get it raw and then ferment it. And it's illegal in 39 states. So there are workarounds, but I have to teach these things to people. They're not commonly known. It's not easy to find. And it's really, really sad what's being done. Also, there's the fact that they're now genetically modifying the foods. They're now genetically editing the foods, which is different. That those don't need to be called genetically modified because it's a different process. And then they're adding the pesticides, which are contributing to the leaky gut, which is contributing to the autoimmune illness. And GAPS, doesn't only help people with autism and ADHD, but it's said to reverse over 200 conditions, from schizophrenia, dyslexia, dyspraxia, bipolar, depression, rheumatoid arthritis, and on and on and on. And so it's like you look at all of these different conditions and illnesses and autoimmune diseases across the board, and we see people recovering, and it's all the same way. It's remove the toxins and go back to a nourishing diet, Then it's hard for people also because their children are addicted to these foods, and oftentimes they're addicted themselves.
What are some strategies that you use with families who are trying to help their picky eaters?
Yeah, there's so many different things. A lot of people will just jump right in and go cold turkey. But otherwise, if you're going to go slowly, it's helpful to just remove one food group at a time. For instance, removing gluten, or then removing dairy, then removing like artificial colors. And then, eventually you'd get to removing all processed foods. But that can make it more attainable. And then also just sneaking things in. So I have a whole library of recipes that actually tend to be very well accepted by picky eaters. And a lot of times what I see is parents will think it's going to be really difficult and there's no way my kids are going to eat these foods. And then the kids take right to these foods and they start eating 3 plates a meal. And I get messaged all the time, my child's so hungry. Is this okay? And I'm like, it's actually a great sign. They can have as much of the stage 1 foods as they want. And I think what's happening is these children are finally getting these nutrients nutrients their bodies have been craving, and they start feeling better. And then they start craving these foods.
Yeah. Where are you with reward systems and putting together different strategies for children to try things? I know it's somewhat controversial, but I know a lot of parents will go that route. And so just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Definitely. I think that's a great tool. I do teach that and recommend that in my program. So there's all kinds of different ways to do it. Preferably, you'd have a non-food item as the reward. Like it could be a gift, it could be a trip somewhere. That's great if you're, working with a verbal child who can understand that and is willing to eat the food for the reward. Otherwise, with my son, we did use a food system reward at one point when he was nonverbal, which Dr. Natasha also recommends this as well, if necessary. And you start with, one bite of this healthy food, and then you can have your preferred food. And I would keep the preferred food out of reach. And initially it was really difficult. My son would scream and have meltdowns just for one bite. And then I would take away both plates. If he wasn't willing to try it, you have to be very committed. You can't give in, or you're just teaching them, that if they scream, they'll get their way. But after about 3 or 4 times of that, removing it, my son got the idea. And then I remember the first time, I just even put the food in his mouth and he spit it out. And I just cheered him on and congratulated him and, made it a big ordeal. And applauded him, and then gave him his preferred food, because you want to make it a really positive experience. And so it is important to not have unrealistic expectations that the very first time you introduce a new food, your child's going to take right to it. We're creatures of habit. But oftentimes what we see is if you serve it 3, 4, 5 times and just encourage it, then it starts to become more normal after they've smelled it, a few times, and you've been more consistent with it. So a lot of that has to do with our mindset too, and our limiting beliefs, saying things like, my child will never eat that, or, so really changing the words that we use and really having faith, and also getting creative and staying committed and eating the foods in front of them as an example. But after we got one bite down, then, then it was 2 bites, and then it was 3 bites, and for the preferred food. And he got the game, they get the game pretty quickly. And then after we got 4 bites down, he was eating the whole plate. And so we just really have to be committed and believe in the process. And I do think it's really important to be creative, because I think, so many people, we all have food preferences, right? Like everybody does. My daughter, says that she only likes apples if they're with peanut butter or in tuna, but she doesn't want to eat them on her own. Or my son or my husband doesn't like tomatoes unless, it's cooked in a soup or different ways. And so I think sometimes I'll tell people, if you serve the broccoli to your child and they don't eat it, like maybe try blending it and then serving it as a puree, or drizzling it on top of food, or you can, cook it with beef, and then when you make these meatballs, you can mix blended vegetables with ground meat and sneak things in. And so just getting creative and just finding out what works best for that family. Yeah.
I love that there's strategies here. And I think that's what a lot more parents are needing. There's definitely people that might be listening that it's like, what, we've never even considered food. And maybe that's a place we should start. Or, is even some of the food that we're eating real food? And so if there's chemicals that are in it, if there's preservatives in it, if there's antibiotics or hormones, like that's a really good place to start if you're new to this, or figuring out if there are certain foods that you're eating, like gluten or dairy, that might be, giving some discomfort to your body or causing inflammation. I know for me, this has been a lifestyle change. And so for people that are maybe kind of in this, that have tried a few things, if they're wanting to go next level, it's been pretty extreme for me. Like, I don't do a lot in the late afternoons or the evenings, because I am actually preparing whole foods for my family. So it's interesting. I get a lot of invites for different events or things that are going on, and I intentionally only do one thing a week, and that's my limit. because it takes me this much time, right? And so I know a lot of kids, maybe families have sports that are going on and they're running their kids around. And so, I have to be intentional then that I'm making something the day before that is going to work for our family. We're going to eat early, and then maybe they're going to have a snack, or they're going to have the approved snack, and then we're going to eat the whole foods meal when we get home. So for instance, last night I was laughing, we get a CSA from a farm that's about an hour away. They come into town and do a drop. And, I had all these Brussels sprouts, and they are so time consuming, right? To take the leaves off and to cut them in half and to prepare them. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is 100%, right? Why I've had to be super intentional with my schedule and what I've decided to do for my family. Because it's not just, right, the Brussels sprouts, right? Cooking and preparing whole foods. And so soaking beans, soaking rice, even just putting the meal plans together, the recipes. And so I know it can be helpful when you're starting off to work with someone like yourself who can help identify what is even real food. Where can you get it? And I know something I'm passionate about working with moms on is how do you fit this into your life, right? So building that mindset around this, that there is hope, you can do this. And then let's look at some areas like, what are you doing during the week? How can you make a couple of meals ahead of time and make this work on the days that you have sports? And so it can feel really overwhelming. And I think that's a huge hurdle that exists for a lot of families that are finding themselves in this. They know they want to do it. It's like anything else. It's like learning how to exercise or, be better with time management, improve your marriage, better parenting strategies, right? Like this is all very intense. It was not modeled well for many of us, and a lot of it's been fear-based. And so it's really taking that deep breath and honoring that, look, this isn't working the way it's going. We've been literally fed a line of how this is acceptable in the world. And it's not acceptable. It's making our children very sick. And so again, it's the adults in the room, the parents in the room, the caregivers in the room, the employers in the room that are trying to figure out different strategies on how to help their employees and keep them at work and keep kids in school. This right here, this conversation, this is it. This is it. It's helping parents identify their mindset around this and helping them find their place in it so they can care well, love, and give their family the strategies they need to be healthy.
Absolutely. And I think us talking about it more and more people living this way, it's going to make it easier for everybody. I talk about that a lot, how if there were millions more people choosing this way and choosing to support their farmers, we wouldn't have the same story. It would be a different world. It would make healing more accessible for everybody.
Yeah. Why do you think more people don't talk about it? Do you think because it's controversial and it's considered woo-woo? And, I find that there's certain topics that you talk about and they immediately become politicized. And so, it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast. Like, you say a certain word and you're already associated with a political party, or you feel a certain way and it's this or that. So do you think that's part of it, or what's your opinion?
Gosh, that's such a great question. And I mean, I was just thinking about this for myself personally, because I think about writing articles again, like I used to really write a lot of articles about what was being put in our food, what was in the cereal, what was in all the things. And, I think there's a lot of reasons why I don't talk about it as much as I used to. And, I'm willing to, but it's almost like there's a lot of reasons. So I felt like I wouldn't get invited to birthday parties and certain things because people are embarrassed about the kind of food that they're serving. They don't want me to see. It still happens today because people know me, people who've been following me a long time. It's like every time I have a conversation with somebody, people like feel this need to, I don't know, like almost pretend to be on the same page as me. It's like, I don't know, I'm not out there judging people, but I'm just trying to educate people. But I did feel that other people felt awkward around me and they felt judged by me. And so I think I also developed a lot of hate groups, actually, and it's also kind of scary to me at times to speak out about these things on a public platform like the internet. It actually instills some fear. I used to have people making memes of my children, memes with my daughter drinking bone broth, memes of my son, videos about my son and me. It's calling me a child abuser. And these people were saying that they were autism advocates, and they were saying that restrictive diets and B12 shots and all these things are abuse, and to like just love your children the way they are. And it was very, very hurtful. I remember I changed the name of my group. I archived it at one point. I thought about not doing it anymore. And I always come back to it because I love helping people. And I really feel a responsibility to share my journey. And I just know how much it helps others. But it's very scary to put yourself out there. It's so controversial, and people can be very hateful, especially online.
Yeah. It goes back to that point in your video where at times as well, where you feel like you want to die, right? And so you are dealing with what you're dealing with your child. You're trying to inform new systems and build new pathways for families to learn and educate. And yet here you are already going through something so profound, so hard, so tragic, so difficult. And now you have individuals, adults, right, who are making memes about your child and calling you a child abuser. And so I think for parents that are listening that maybe don't have a child that is neurodivergent or have, chronic illness, this isn't just about the child. It's about the caregivers. It's about the energy that they're also holding, not only from a personal level, but I mean, you could, we could bring family into this, and, just how at times things are so discredited, right? You can talk about maybe colleagues at work that you're bringing this up with, and it's like, oh, she's just complaining again, or having to cancel events and people thinking that you're irresponsible or that you're not credible. I mean, the list could go on, right? And so this just isn't this one-off scenario. I mean, this impacts everybody, personally the caregiver, but it impacts the family, and it's impacting our society. But it's like, I'm with you. Like at times it's like, how do we talk about this? And in a healthy, non-judgmental way. I mean, I'm not here to judge other parents that when they're listening to this podcast, it's to provide information and education that, look, take this, do what you want with it, no judgment. But if you're not happy with where things are, or you're not getting the information or the care or the treatment that you feel like your child needs, then guess what? There are other options that are out there. Join me next week as we continue our conversation with Lindsy Moffatt around helping caregivers readjust their mindset and approach to helping their children heal. We all need to be prepared, because whether autism is a part of your life or not, this has a ripple effect on all of us. We'll see you next week, friends. Please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with other caregivers who are needing support as they move onward in their day-to-day lives. Thanks again to our sponsors, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Pancyzyszyn with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and CHIKA Creative for helping us land the mothership in the real world.